I'm with the iconic Chip Conley. And this is truly, Chip, this is one of the greatest pleasures of my career.
Mm.
I have to say, thank you for making yourself accessible. You've really not made my day, you've made my year. And this segment is called 20 Questions with Chip Conley. So for everybody listening out there, Chip's bio can be found on our site. And it would take me on a good day more than 20 minutes to do it any justice. So I'm going to let you go to Chip's bio on our site. You can view it yourself. I'm going to dive right into these questions. First of all, how are you, Chip?
I'm great. Thank you. It's good to be with you, Harris.
Fantastic. So let's start with this question. You had already made great fortunes before you met Airbnb founder Brian Chesky. And what made you think that, contrary to the advice of some colleagues, that if you built it, they would come?
Well, yeah, I started a boutique hotel company called Joie de Vivre, which was all based in California, based in San Francisco. And we created 52 boutique hotels over 24 years. And I sold it at the bottom of the Great Recession. I made fortunes and I'd lost fortunes and I'd made fortunes, but I sort of sold at the bottom of the market. So I did okay, but I mean, I don't know if I would have stayed the rest of my life not working. There's a great movie with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway called The Intern. And De Niro says, musicians don't retire, they quit when there's no more music left inside of them. So I knew I had music inside of me. And at age 52, I got the call from Brian saying he wanted me to be his in-house mentor to help them as a company democratize hospitality. And this was 7.5 years ago. And yeah, to be quite honest, I was curious. And I think curiosity is sort of an elixir for life.
And of course, they did come, and they're still coming. And I know that thanks to you and Chesky and their team. And I'll use this as a verb. I myself Airbnb a property, and what a great business model that is. Now, let's talk about, you mentioned several very proud moments in your book. What is your proudest? Pick one. What is your proudest moment at Airbnb?
So I wrote a book called Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder. And actually, interestingly enough, I think my proudest moment was recently. Now, I spent 4 years there full time, and then I've been a strategic advisor for 3.5 years. But my proudest moment was a few months ago when Airbnb had to lay people off. Now, that doesn't sound like a proud moment, but what I was proud of was how Brian, he was my boss, but I was also his mentor, which is an interesting relationship when your boss is your mentee. I was proud of how he handled the layoff and how he handled the communication about how Airbnb needed to make some major changes in their business model, and how he really did everything he could to support those who had to leave. And so it was, to me, I felt like proud papa because I saw my son living up to all the leadership lessons I had tried to offer him.
That's a fabulous story. And we're going to talk, among my questions for you, we're going to cover that bridge that you talk about in your book between what you call digital quotient, DQ, and emotional quotient, which my wife says I have none of, by the way, and how those two intercede or can intercede. But let's go back in time. You're a Stanford whiz kid, and you built one of the most successful boutique hotel chains in the United States. And what astounds me is that you started, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, with one hotel. It was an hourly joint.
It was not even a hotel; it was a motel. But Four Seasons, you're a Canadian. Four Seasons, a Canadian company, started with a motor lodge as well. So yes, it was one motel, pay by the hour in a bad neighborhood.
Fabulous. So what was the secret sauce? How did you grow it to, it became a really successful I think the second most successful boutique
second largest. Yeah. Second
right
largest.
in the United States.
Correct. Second largest.
So how did you do that, Chip?
It was a few things. I'll be brief. Number one is creating a great culture. Our culture was based upon joy. If you're Canadian, you know a little bit of French, and joie de vivre means joy of life. Number two, it was surrounding myself with a great leadership team who actually were as purposeful as I was, and we worked well together. And number three was to always underpromise and overdeliver when it came to our customers. You know, we were really focused on the equation disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So we wanted to do our best to make sure either reality was really high or expectations were not so high, so that we created an environment where our customers were our biggest supporters and evangelists.
Fabulous. I'm just going to piggyback on your comment. I'm going to go off the beat for a little bit. Is that something you learn in business school, or is it ascribed? Is it achieved? You know, under promise and over deliver.
I learned that from my dad, to be honest with you. My dad said in high school to me once, you know, it's amazing how just a sentence from your parent is something that's seared into your brain. My dad, I was boasting about something that I was going to do. And my dad said, you know what I care about is people who underpromise and overdeliver, because they'll never disappoint me. And I just remembered it ever since then. And so for me, that has been a hallmark of my career, which is an interesting thing to do because I'm a marketing person. So marketing people are our natural tendency is to over promise and maybe under deliver. But I've learned the hard way that when you do that, you end up with, you know, a bankrupt emotional bank account.
That's an excellent way of putting it. And it's a nice segue into my next question about your academy. So let's start with this. Who exactly is a modern elder? Define modern elder.
So I was called a modern elder at Airbnb, and I initially said, well, hell no, I'm no modern elder, but I was twice the age of the average employee there when I joined. But I wasn't elderly. So an elder is someone who's relatively speaking older than the people around them. And yes, I was, you know, my boss was 21 years younger than me. So let's be honest. So that's one thing. I came to realize that a modern elder is as curious as they are wise. So they're not just about being revered and having reverence for them. They're about relevance as much as reverence. And the relevance means that you better understand the context in which you're working. So a modern elder is often older than people around them, but still curious and have a beginner's mind. So here at the Modern Elder Academy, our average age is 54. So these are not elderly people, but they are typically solidly in midlife, but also in a place where they're really ready to repurpose themselves.
Right. So would it be fair to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but in terms of motivation for starting Modern Elder Academy, I'm only guessing, you know, from reading your book and watching many of your TED Talks, and, you know, that the impetus for Modern Elder Academy was Airbnb and your relationship with Chesky, right? And his partners.
Yeah. And if someone wanted to really see it in full-fledged, you know, full glory, you could go to a Commonwealth Club speech or talk that Brian and I had on stage, where for an hour we talk about how behind the scenes we built that mentor-mentee relationship. We called ourselves mentorns. We were both mentor and intern at the same time. And yeah, that was the impetus for me writing the book, Wisdom at Work. And ultimately the book was the impetus for me to create the Modern Elder Academy.
That's fabulous. So it's interesting because in Canada and the United States, you know, merely from a demographic perspective, you know, the workforce is aging. I mean, even in the wake of, you know, this modern day tragedy called COVID, the workforce is aging, and longevity, I'm not going to say is a mixed bag, but certainly from a retraining and reskilling standpoint, there are challenges. And so I have to ask you this question because I'm an abysmal marketer. My training is, I'm a lawyer by training.
Yes, I know.
Right. And so, and I'm a higher education lawyer. And so I always speak in the context of learning outcomes. So what is if somebody asked you, Chip, what learning outcomes do you desire? I'm gonna enroll, which I am. If there's any room for a slug like me, right? What's the desired learning outcome for an enrollee?
So that's a great question, Harris. So Phil Pizzo, who used to run the Stanford Medical School, has created something called Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute, and we have a lot of respect for him. We have a lot of collaboration as well. He's actually proven that when people get into about age 45 or 50 and beyond, 3 key pillars of their life are purpose, wellness, and community. So I would say that that is something that we really offer here: purpose, wellness, and community. I think the thing that surprises me the most is that third one. Not to say that I don't think people want community, but what's so evident is how much people want authenticity, and they want to feel connected to a group of people. And so the experience of coming to the Modern Elder Academy, or MEA, is really almost like a rite of passage in midlife, where people actually, sort of like going to summer camp, in your teen years. It's an opportunity to connect with people who are like-minded and navigating their own transitions of midlife. And so the thing that really, I'd say the number one thing that people take from this is a sense of a growth mindset. If you read Carol Dweck's work from Stanford, a growth mindset means that you're constantly learning and improving. And that's really what I think people feel. And so at age 59, I'm learning Spanish and I'm learning how to surf, which is not something that most people about to turn age 60 are usually doing.
What amazes me, Chip, about you is just how delightfully unconventional you are. It just is, I understand why you are a New York Times bestseller among your many other accolades. And so I'm gonna cite another quote. Actually, it's not your quote. You attribute this, I believe, to Gandhi. First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. And what does that mean?
So I said this on the very first opportunity that I had to address the very small Airbnb workforce when I joined 7.5 years ago. I said that we're a disruptor, but if we're a hospitality disruptor, we better be friendly about it. But we also better recognize that there are going to be forces beyond us that are going to be working against us. And Gandhi's quote was really speaking about the British back when India was under British rule. First they ignore you. Well, that's what's true with Airbnb. When I joined Airbnb, people thought I was an idiot. Like, what are you doing? That's a bad idea. Then they ridicule you. Well, they were sort of doing that when they said that's a bad idea, but that was really when, in the first 2 years I was there, a bunch of my hotelier friends and some hospitality media laughed about this, Chip, this well-known pioneering hospitality boutique hotel guy who was joining this stupid millennial idea. So the ridicule was there. Then they fight you, and that's been continuing. So sometimes that relates to just the regulations around home sharing. And then you win. Now, the winning piece is, I would say that the win depends on how you look at that. When it comes to regulatory-wise, the legal side, we win so many times, and then we lose because, there's a new set of regulations. But I think the biggest win is this. When I joined Airbnb 7.5 years ago, it was a millennial budget urban business. It was relatively small. We are now a mainstream hospitality brand that is on the same level as Marriott in terms of awareness, in terms of satisfaction, etc. And so I think that the win is that companies like Marriott have been trying to figure out how to get into the home sharing business. And so the fact is, home sharing has become mainstream, and as such, that's the win.
What I love about your philosophy is you walk the talk. It's so customer driven, and a lot of people talk the talk, but Chip Conley walks the talk, and it's amazing what you guys built. And did you ever think it would turn into that, Airbnb?
No. Actually, to tell, I don't tell this story very often, but I'll give it to you. I'll give it to you and your listeners, Harris. So when I first started, I was supposed to be 15 hours a week, not 15 hours a day, which is what it became. 15 hours a week. I said, okay, don't pay me. Brian. Just give me, $10,000 or 10,000 stock options that expire in 6 months, and I'll do this for 6 months with you. That was it. No pay, just some stock options were worth a ton of money because, I think the stock options were worth maybe $3 or $4 a piece. So, okay, 6 months of work part-time. So I wasn't going into it thinking, okay, I'm going to make a small fortune here. I went into it with a curiosity, a desire to help Brian, because I could see that as a young entrepreneur and leader, he really needed somebody by his side. He also had venture capital money, and that can be scary because those people, the venture capitalists, they want you to succeed, but the moment they think that you're not succeeding, they get rid of you. So, but I didn't have any idea it would become as big as it did. I had some inkling that yes, it could get bigger and be more mainstream, but it got bigger beyond my wildest dreams.
Fantastic story. Now, switching gears a little bit. So what do you want 20-somethings to know about 50-somethings?
I want 20-somethings to know that 50-somethings can still be curious, can still have an open mind and be open to new experiences. And that yes, if they have been cultivating and harvesting their wisdom, they may have something to offer you.
Fabulous. I agree with that. Of course, I'm self-interested as a 54-year-old man. So what do you want 50-somethings? What do you want modern elders to know about 20-somethings?
Well, back to the EQ. I mean, the world is enamored with digital intelligence. And it's obvious that younger people who we call digital natives, on average, have a better fluency with the digital world. So you have something to learn from them. And when those of my compatriots beat up on millennials, they say things like, oh, they're so entitled and, they expect to grow so quickly. Well, when you see Mark Zuckerberg becoming a billionaire by the time he's 24 and Brian Chesky and his partners becoming billionaires by the time they're 30, you have this perspective that I didn't have when I was growing up. I had a more linear, there's a corporate ladder that you were supposed to, climb. So I think what we need to do is be really respectful that the future of the world is about intergenerational collaboration. And, if you're 55 years old, there's a 70% chance your boss is younger than you. And if you're going to work into your 60s or 70s, or maybe even your 80s, guess what? That number is only going to get higher. That percentage is going to get higher. So, work with that younger person because they have something to learn from you and you have something to learn from them.
Well, who's a better role model on that plane than Chip Conley? Fantastic story. Okay, I'm going to put you on the nut here. What is the single most important quality? There's so many qualities that you enumerate in your book, in your TED Talks, in all of your appearances, and I would not know where to start, but I'm going to put you on the nut and ask you, what is the single most important quality that somebody could have in business?
I think I'm a big believer, even though I hate the term, of servant leadership. Servant leadership means that the higher you are in an organization, the more you serve others. And so that one of my favorite questions to ask anybody who's ever been a direct report of mine is, how can I support you to do the best work of your life here at Joie de Vivre, Airbnb, Modern Elder Academy? Because it actually says to the person who works for me that I'm here to support them. I want them to do the best work of their life. And it's their responsibility and agency to actually to help me determine and help me understand what is the habitat they need to do their best work.
That's a great answer. And that's a nice segue into my next question, which is, how can we convince younger people with high digital quotients to embrace modern elders with high emotional quotients? I mean, I said it before, I'll say it, it's worth repeating. I think you're you must be the role model for the poster boy for this, because it's an incredible bridge, but isn't it also an incredible challenge? when you're working for someone who is 20 something years your junior.
Yeah.
Especially if you're Chip Conley and you've had a successful run and built a mini empire in, the second largest boutique hotel chain in the United States.
Yeah, I had to right size my ego, no doubt about that. I think one of the things that's a great lesson in my book that we use here at the Academy is the following steps to becoming what I consider a modern elder. And if you take these steps, it will help you be more open to learning from someone younger than you, and to actually having a path where they're going to listen to you. Because otherwise, if you take the opposite path, they'll say, "Okay, boomer." Because generally speaking, a lot of people who are older have a tendency to like lecture younger people. That doesn't work. So here's the 4 steps quickly. Number 1, evolve. This means you better be open to shedding some of the identities, some of the knowledge, and some of the ways of thinking that are no longer serving you. Number 2 is learn. Have the beginner's mindset. Be open to be curious about things that you don't understand. As I said in the book, I tended to intern publicly and mentor privately. So interning publicly means I was willing to be curious in public. Number 3 is collaborate. As you've mentioned, as we get older, on average, our EQ grows. Emotional intelligence grows with age because we have pattern recognition. We're able to recognize the pattern in ourselves and others, and we understand emotions a little bit better. We're more able to moderate our emotions a little bit better. And then finally, the 4th step is the step that the okay boomer person does. Number 1, the 4th step is you counsel. You are available for counsel. You're available to be the wise elder, but you do that last. Once you've done evolve, learn, and collaborate, and people see, oh my gosh, that guy Harris, he is just there's so much wisdom inside, but there's humility as well. And there's an openness to new thinking. That's when the millennials lean into you and say, I want your advice. I want your counsel. And so that to me is the virtuous circle that takes you to the place where you can actually, you attract, you're not having to like feel irrelevant and bewildered, but you're attracting young people who actually, whether they're your boss or not, they want to collaborate with you.
That's a great prescriptive. I'm chuckling inside a little bit because it reminds me of every time my 12-year-old son, calls me boomer. Now that has new meaning after following this interview. But that's a great prescriptive that you've given. Not just to 50-somethings, but to 20-somethings. Very, very important. And it segues into my next question, which is, you talked about mentoring. And so what is a mentor exactly? And why is that term so important to you? It comes up a lot.
Yeah, so
right?
a mentor is someone who's a mentor and an intern at the same time, which means that you are in a mutual mentor relationship with everybody else you work with. So if Brian and I were both mentors, it meant that there were times that I was mentoring him and there were times he was mentoring me. So the teacher and the student were interchangeable. There was a reciprocity. And so I think the future of learning and development in the organizational world is going to be all about how do we create mutual mentorship relationships and artificial intelligence software that help match you with the person who is your yin to your yang. Meaning, they need to learn what you know and you need to learn what they know.
So on that note, you also say in your book, in Wisdom at Work, own the word elder. I think that's what you say. Mm-hmm. And it gives you power. And Chip Conley, I'm trying to own that word. I confess to you that I probably, like so many of my brothers and sisters, in my age bracket, I struggle with that. I have mixed emotions about that statement, if I'm honest with you. So
yeah. I listen. When I was first called modern elder, I mean, can I use some French? I said, "Fuck you." I didn't want to be a modern elder. Elder and elderly sounded way too similar. But elder liberated from elderly means you have the experience of many decades to offer someone. So I decided to double, because they called me the Modern Elder. I doubled down on it. Ultimately, created the academy and the Modern Elder Academy, using the word, because there are a lot of words that historically that were not well regarded. They were derided. The word black. I mean, or go back to the British times with the U.S. Yankee was a derided word, and it meant the dandy Yankees, as the colonialists were sort of like these effeminate Yankees. And then the Yankees owned the word. Black was a word in the South in the U.S. that was actually derided and considered a bad word until Malcolm X came along and said black is beautiful. Queer is a word now in the LGBTQ lexicon, where you didn't want to be called a queer on the school grounds, but now there are people who are not even gay or lesbian who call themselves queer because they have a queer sensibility. So it's basically going back and trying to own a word by giving it an alternative meaning. In this case, the alternative meaning to thinking of an elder as someone who is basically being put out to pasture is the elder has the wisdom to help support and make differences in the world that are positive for everyone.
That's such a fabulous message. And on that note, I always say, this is just my own experience. And of course, I'd love for you to weigh in on this. I always say that show me someone who's retired, and I'll show you someone who is typically, not always, but typically, more typically than not, very unhappy. And so I love your quote, rewire, not retire. So how do we get there? How do we help people rewire and not retire?
Well, let's do a math exercise. Let's say that you're going to live till age 90, Harris. Do you think that's possible?
I hope so. Okay. I hope so.
So let's say you live till age 90. It's not unheard of, for sure. And as medical technology only gets better, the chances that at age 54 you live till age 90, it's very possible. Well, guess what? At age 54, you are exactly halfway through your adult life if you start counting at age 18. You have 36 years behind you from age 18 to 54. You have 36 years ahead of you up to age 90. Oh my God, you're only halfway through your adult life. When we help people to do that new kind of math, it opens their eyes to the possibilities of things that they could try and start now. Another question I love to ask people is, what is it that you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now? Come up with that answer. Okay. It could be, I wish I knew, I don't know. I wish I knew Spanish, frankly, living here now in Mexico much of the time, where this is where our primary campus is. So what is it that 10 years from now, I wish I had learned now? And when you start to think that way and realize, my gosh, I have half of my adult life ahead of me, it starts to open you up to the paths you could go on that require a growth mindset. So part of what we really try to help imbue in people is this sense that they're open to trying new things, maybe having it be awkward at first, but being surrounded by other people who are doing the same, you feel a certain level of comfort in sticking your neck out and being fresh at something new.
Yeah, you make a great point about the importance of peers, and just anyone. I'm going to urge everyone to go out and not only buy wisdom at work, which is honestly, I'm not saying this because I'm in front of Chip Conley. This is really and truly just a great piece of work. I had a visceral response, at every turn in this book, as a 54-year-old man, who has had a law practice for many years, and I felt many of the same things. I identified with so many of the principles that you expound in your book. And so having that peer group at MEA becomes really beneficial, right? Because if I am fortunate enough to live until I'm 90 or longer, my kids tease me about it. My doctor tells me that because I went vegan a few years ago, I'm going to be paying taxes for that much longer. But I mean, that sounds like the paid skeptic, like sounds like there's a lawyer in the room. But I love what you do. And it's just so important to humanity right now, especially in the West. I shouldn't just say the West. I mean, there's so many countries where you have an aging demographic, Japan, Germany, Italy. Everyone should be reading this book. And enrolling in your program, I should say, as well. But let me turn to I'm going to get a little more serious now and talk about the 2002 downturn that you had faced. And I've heard you say that you had 9 lives, you had a broken ankle, a septic leg. You became aware of the suicides of colleagues affected by the dot-com bust. And so we're currently in the midst of, I don't know what, an unprecedented period in history, this pandemic. And what's your advice for business people and just people out there?
One of the things that especially men are not very good at is creating what's called emotional insurance. So you have property and liability insurance for a rainy day, but when it comes to your own rainy day with your career or your life, a divorce, a family tragedy, a health diagnosis, a lot of people, especially men, don't have that safety net. Modern Elder Academy is something that's we've really seen that for the cohorts and the people and how the alums support each other. But if you're not going to the academy, how do you do that? Well, you start asking yourself, who are the people who you would rely on if you did have that kind of rainy day? It's surprising who you answer, because it may not be your best friend. It may not be the collection of people you spend most of your time with. It may be that person who feels like that wise confidant that you knew from college or from your first boss from long ago, who's still living and still energetic, and that's somebody who you rely upon. Sometimes what people say is you create your own personal board of directors. I would never, if someone said to me, I want you to be on my personal board of directors, I'd say, you know what, I'll opt out of that, because I don't think a person needs 5 people on a board of directors. It only takes 1 or 2. But I think the key is to help that person understand how important they are to you. And then don't just wait until the bad situation happens. Build a relationship with that person. Clearly that person has some wisdom, and you appreciate that. So, we don't usually think that way. We just sort of think like, who do I want to go grab a beer with or something. And that's fine. But that isn't necessarily the person who's going to be able to be there and support to you when you go through some of the most traumatic times of your life.
That's a great answer. Wow. I guess where there are problems, the world this is so unprecedented, but where there are problems for humanity to solve, Chip, there have traditionally been what I'll call rainbows. Right? There is also opportunity. So where do you see the opportunity or future opportunity for modern elders arising from COVID, if there are such opportunities?
So there's a couple of thoughts there. Number one is, I think when it comes to the workplace, if more and more of the workplace is remote, then some people have said, oh, it's terrible for older people, like say 60 and older, because they're a special class, like you don't want to. Well, if people are working remotely, then that becomes less of an issue. So that doesn't mean you can't work in a workplace. It means you may have to do remote work if COVID lasts a long time. That doesn't mean there aren't jobs for you. I think the big question here is how do we recognize in a world that is increasingly awash in knowledge, all of the knowledge of the world is right here in this little device in my pocket. But what the world is sorely in need of is often wisdom. So it was Peter Drucker 61 years ago who coined the term knowledge workers. He said knowledge workers are going to basically run the world in the future. And he was right. 7 of the 10 most valuable companies in the world today are tech companies. Tech companies are where knowledge workers hang out. But frankly, knowledge workers hang out in any business. If you're in the IT department, and frankly, most marketing companies today, most people who are in the marketing departments are knowledge workers because they're all about data. So in a world that's awash in knowledge, what we need is wisdom workers. We should retire the term knowledge workers because everybody's a knowledge worker today. But what we really need is wisdom workers. And so part of my job has been to go out and help send that message to the world's chief HR officers, CEOs as well, so they understand that intergenerational collaboration and age diversity is an enormous competitive advantage for companies. Just like all diversity tends to help make a better company. Age diversity is almost the best. And why is that? It's partly because a young brain and an old brain operate differently. A young brain is exceptionally focused. An older brain thinks synthetically and connects the dots. Having a team full of those kinds of thinkers at different ages gives you cognitive diversity in a way that allows you to see blind spots and opportunities that you'd never see if everybody on the team was within a 10-year age band of each other.
Well, that's interesting, and it's fascinating that you raise, Drucker. I mean, wasn't it Drucker who said, and I'm paraphrasing Drucker, but measure everything.
Mm-hmm.
If you can measure it, you can improve it. And what I love about Chip Conley, among other things, is that you seem to marry that thought very well with Maslow, and the emotional quotient side of, when you build that bridge, and you're a living testament to that. I mean, Airbnb, I'm only guessing that they could not have done, no disrespect to the really bright young minds who entrusted you and who were the founders of Airbnb. But that bridge was so important, from reading what I've read. We have time for one more question, Chip, and I'm actually ripping it off from Dan Rather, because why wouldn't I? And that is, what is the one question you wish that I had asked you and which I hadn't, and what's the answer to that question?
So who's your modern elder, Chip? My modern elder, let me tell you who my father certainly was my modern elder. My modern elder was a guy named Herb Kelleher. He was the founding CEO of Southwest Airlines, and for 37 years, the CEO. I tried to reach out to him soon after I started my business to have him become my mentor. And his assistant said no, but you can write him a letter. And as it turns out, once a year, I would write the CEO of Southwest Airlines a letter to get his advice and mentorship around how to create a company that had a great culture. And so for 10 years, we did that, 10 letters, 10 years. And so it's a great example of saying, my gosh, the person who's going to be your wise, modern elder isn't even somebody you may have ever met. In the world we live in today with the internet, you may actually just read a book that they've written or watch some of the videos they've written or they've done, or read some of their articles. So you don't have to have them living next door to you.
Okay, any parting thoughts?
No, just I feel honored to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh boy, much respect. Everybody, I'm going to say this again, sound like a broken record, but why wouldn't I? Go out and buy Wisdom at Work. It's such an amazing book. I learned so much, especially if you're in the business of being a paid skeptic. You'll want to read Wisdom at Work, whether you're 20, 30, 40, 50, or hopefully, God willing, 90.
Yes.
Chip Conley, thank you for joining me. Much respect. Thank you.